Evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Keeping the Beacon Lit podcast. I am your host, A.B. Timothy, and today I have the special opportunity of showcasing an author. He is an Amazon #1 best-selling author on his latest series, which is all about critique and how to take it and how to give it in large part. So I'm excited to have him on. He is Ross Lampert, the critique doctor, as he's known. Very exciting. I know him. I have the privilege of knowing him in real life. We attend a writer's coffee house here in Tucson, Arizona, as that is where I'm from. And frankly, it's been a real treat getting to know several other authors in the coffee house. Most of them, I should say, are more advanced in years than I and are very knowledgeable and full of wisdom when it comes to navigating the publishing industry and getting and taking critique and also giving it, asking for help. And they've been very encouraging to me on this publication journey that I've been going on over the last couple of months. So like I said, I'm very privileged to have him on. And yeah, now I'm going to sort of open the floor a little bit to let him introduce himself, talk about what he does, what he writes, and what he's currently putting out. So, Ross, feel free.
Well, Al, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. You're absolutely right. The coffee house, which we discovered not too long ago, has been around for 10 years, which was quite a surprise. Great opportunity for folks who are in the Tucson area. And I'm actually an hour and a half away from where we meet, but it's a great opportunity to share ideas. It's not really a critique group, but we certainly share ideas and the trials and tribulations and the occasional successes of being a writer and working on getting things published or getting them published. So I've been writing since at least third grade. That's as far back as I can verify that I wrote something. I wrote a one-act play based on the Mercury space program, which should define how young I really am, or not, as the case may be.
Very true.
And we performed the play in class, and I guess that the writing bug bit at that moment. And so I've been writing off and on throughout the rest of my life. I participated in critique groups and writers groups when I was in college. And then after I went on active duty in the Air Force, I really didn't. I did do some technical writing of various kinds during the course of my Air Force career, but not a lot of fiction. But then after I retired in 2000, I said, okay, that's it. This is my time to go out. I've wanted to be a writer for a while, so I'm going to go do it. And spent the first few years of that time writing short stories and trying to get them published, and didn't have much success. In fact, didn't have any, but I did have the success of having the works that I sent to some of the major science fiction and fantasy magazines be rejected, yes, but with comments from the editor, which is about as good as you can get. If you're going to get a rejection, that's what you want to get.
Yep.
Because that meant it made it all the way through all of the slush pile readers and made it all the way to the final cut. So that was encouraging. But since I had VA benefits to use, I decided this would be a good opportunity to go get a master's in English, and because there was a university close by, fortunately, that had a creative writing program. So I signed up for that, and after getting some extra undergraduate humanities course credits that I needed, went into the class the first day of the writing the novel class, and the professor hands out this sign-up sheet and says, okay, sign up for when you want to have your chapters critiqued. And I'm putting my name down on 3 dates like we were supposed to, and then the realization hit me, oh, I've got to write this novel.
Uh-huh.
Oh, and I did get started. I should back up just a bit. The
Sure.
idea for the novel, which is called The Eternity Plague, um, came from it actually literally woke me up one night in the fall of 2003, and I could not get to sleep again until I got up and wrote it down. And basically, what had been going on around that time was there was a bird flu pandemic going on among birds. It had not crossed over to humans, but the press was treating it as if it was going to pass over to humans, cross over to humans, and we didn't have any immunity to it, and everybody was going to get sick, and everybody was going to die. And oh, it was wonderful because we were going to get to cover. We, the press, were going to get to cover it all. Isn't that exciting? And that just
Yeah.
ticked me off. That attitude just made me very unhappy. And so that was the genesis for the idea behind the book. And so the first few drafts of that novel were my master's degree thesis. But after I graduated, um, I looked at it and said, okay, this is fine, but this is not a publishable work. So I spent the next 8 years working on it and working on it and working on it, to the point where I felt it was publishable. And so in late 2013, I actually hit the publish button on Amazon. And then two more, and then I realized along the way there that this wasn't a standalone book. There was going to be more to the story. So I ended up writing two more novels, Chrysalis and Wild Spread, which completed the trilogy. But along the way, after I moved out here to Arizona, I was doing all the master's degree work and that sort of stuff in Oklahoma City. After I moved out here, I joined a critique group, and I wasn't real satisfied with it. So one of the other members of that group and I decided to create our own group. So we did. And a few years after that, we were thinking about and talking about, well, how do we, when we're doing critique, how should we be doing this? And so we put together a whole bunch of questions, probably around 50, that we thought, okay, these are the kinds of things we would want to be thinking about and looking at when we're critiquing somebody else's work. And I turned those into a series of blog posts over the course of probably a couple of years. And then a few years after that set was completed, I went back to them and updated them, made audio versions of them. And they're still up and available, I think, on my first website, which is rossblampert.com. But I also, I now have another website called thecritiquedoctor.com, amazingly enough. And they've all been shifted over to that as well. But I'd run across a book by an author by the name of Nina Amir. The title of the book was something like Book Your Blog. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I can turn my blog posts into a book, which was the thesis of the book. So that's what I started doing. And so at first it was going to be one book. And then it kept growing and growing and growing. One of the chapters that I decided to put in, which was new, was how to find a critique relationship that will work for you, where you can look for them and how you evaluate them and that sort of thing. And that just kept growing and growing and growing to the point where I said, okay, got to split that out, make that its own separate book. So did that. But the rest of the material kept growing and growing and growing as I was saying, oh, that's something I need to write about.
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh, yeah, that too. So it was getting to the point where the book was going to be a doorstop. It was going
Yeah.
to be that thick. And so I ended up splitting it up into five more books, five books instead of one. So now it's a series of six. And that's where we are today.
Right. And I remember when you first brought up asking for early readers
Hmm.
at the coffee house back when I first joined in, I think it was November, or no, first time there was October, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And you were looking for early readers. I think at
Yeah.
that point you were just talking about three books. So has it expanded since then, even, or is it you just weren't sure about the other three books? You didn't really mention them.
No, the by that time I had the books all split out.
Okay.
So I think by that time I was in the process of getting them ready to be published because I'd already been through a professional editor with
Mm-hmm.
all of them. I'd been through, I found a cover artist. And so all the covers were all done or close to done. And so, yeah, but because I was getting ready to start launching them, I wanted
Right.
to, hopefully have some reviews up on the Amazon webpage and others.
Early
So that
reviews.
they
Right.
launched. Yeah. So when they launched, there would be at least one or two or three um, to help the launch along.
Right. So you heard it here first, folks. Review the books you got because authors live or die on our reviews sometimes. So, right. Well, that's really cool. And that kind of answered a lot of the questions, honestly, that I was going to ask. But
Sorry.
no, it's fine because part of the show is especially the author spotlights is all about exploring the backstory, sort of the background of the authors that I have on, and where they're coming from, why they got there, that sort of thing. So that's totally fine. That answered a lot of questions and kind of makes my life easier as the host, right? So quickly before we keep going and get into more questions, I do want to just reiterate the heart of this podcast is a creative inspiration podcast. The show is called Keeping the Beacon Lit. It's all about calling on fantastical references in the title alone. The beacon is lit, Gondor calls for aid is where sort of the title begins to have its genesis. And so um I believe as a creator, every creative has a fire inside of them that could be put out if you let it die. But the goal of this podcast and the goal of having these guests on and sharing their stories with you, the listeners, and sharing my own experiences with you, the listeners, is to help you humanize your creative endeavors and sort of give you a reason to keep going because as you just heard, he started writing in third grade. And, I won't tell you how old he is because I don't know, but you can tell it's been a while, right? And
Yeah.
so even though he didn't even publish, it sounds like if I recalled that correctly, he didn't even publish until several years after college. He kept going. He kept the fire alive. The beacon never died. There may have been points when he was a working professional where the beacon was a mere match in the darkness, and then may have been other points where the beacon was a bonfire. But that's the size of the beacon is irrelevant to the calling of this show, which is to help you keep it lit and to add fuel to your fire and to keep going. So, some quick groundskeeping things that I need to take care of. If you don't mind, Ross, bear with me.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
so I am running a Kickstarter for my book, which is coming out in May. It's called The Shards of Arthur's Shield, and it is an Arthurian adventure, sword and sorcery type fantasy novel. Part of the Kickstarter deal is if you support the Kickstarter, you get a shout out here on the podcast. So I'm going to quickly read through the 15 or so names that I have here and thank you all profusely for supporting the this podcast by supporting the book the host of the podcast has written. So I want to thank Amber Davis, Don Davis, Yamato, Harry, Merg, Isle, Jason, Aaron, Greg, Tony Garcia, Mistamac, Mark Evanson, Elliot Kleinschmidt, and Schwambly Tibble. All of these people, no matter how little or how much they've supported the book and thereby supporting the show, they've been a huge encouragement to me. They've helped keep my beacon lit. They've helped me through darker times, even this last month. Or this month's only 7 days old, but sometimes you just have those dark moments. But I'm able to. I'm blessed with the opportunity to be able to open my backer list and see, wow, these people believe me or believe in me. They believe in what I'm doing here on the show and also in what I've written. And so part of as bringing it back to the show a little bit, part of keeping your beacon lit is critique and receiving feedback from other people, and that inspiring you to do better. And I'm able to look at my backer list and say, wow, these people believe in me. They've put their name down and said, we want to support this book. We want to order copies early, even though we haven't read the book yet. We've only read a blurb. We've only read maybe a chapter on his website. They're still willing to put their weight behind me, which is awesome, and it's super huge. And part of what has kept me going over the years, and this is jumping back into the show now, is I was part of a flash fiction guild on Discord for several years, where we would meet. It began once a week, but that became too much for all of our schedules, so we split it up into once every 2 weeks. And the goal was to have a different host every time, have a different prompt every time, and write a short story between 500 to 1,000 words long. And I like to say that that's where I cut my teeth on storytelling. I've been telling stories for 12 years. I've been telling stories since I was in 6th grade, and even earlier, if you count me, scribbling images on a paper and making up stories about it. I wasn't writing those stories, but I was storytelling. And so I've been writing for a long time. But that guild that I was in was where I grew substantially as an author, because they were willing to say, hey, Al, this part, you could work on that. Or, hey, Al, this scene is too long. Or, hey, Al, you really need to work on sharpening your characters and making them more alive in, the 200 words you get to talk about that character. And it's hard, but I do feel like it's inspired me. It's kept me going. And even though I've recently had to leave the guild for non-disclosed reasons, even I'm not sure why I had to leave it, but I was sent out of the guild, it feels like, almost, because when I first left the guild, it hurt. I was leaving all of my friends behind. And I wasn't told why, but I was just told I wasn't welcome anymore. But I look back on that now and see that as the fire that was sparked underneath my seat and has gotten me going. Because they said, the one explanation that I got from the person who sort of like let me down was, we think it is better if you continue your writing journey elsewhere. And so I've taken those words to heart, and I've done that. I went to Tucson Comic-Con. I sat in a panel called Keeping the Beacon Lit, and have stolen that brand and made it my own. And now here I am. What is it? Gosh, I don't know. Almost 10 months later, almost a year since they kicked me out of the guild, and now I'm publishing my first novel. So that critique group grew me, but there came a point where when I outgrew them, at their own admission, it seemingly, they said, we're done with you. You don't need us anymore, or we don't want you here anymore. Whatever the reason was, they sent me away. And I took everything I learned from that critique group, everything I got from them, and have taken it and have sort of spread my wings, as it were. So I wanted to ask you, Ross, that, I mean, I can't say it was a similar experience because I don't know what it was like, but you mentioned sort of in your opening backstory that when you first came to Arizona, you joined a critique group, but it wasn't the right fit for you. And so talking to somebody like me, who maybe is looking for a new critique group, or one of my listeners who is kind of stuck in a group that doesn't really feel the best for them, what kind of advice, and obviously it's probably in your books, so if you're listening to this, go buy his books and you'll get it, you'll be able to read it and reread it and reread it again so you can really dig in there. But I'm curious, what advice would you give somebody like me or somebody like them who's looking for a better group or a different group to continue their progression as a writer?
Sure. Before I answer that question, I want to go back to some of the things you said. Uh,
Absolutely.
the One of the things that a good critique group will do is help you, as you feel it did, help you as a writer grow, get better, learn where your weak spots are, learn where your strong areas are,
Mm-hmm.
and build on that to become a better writer. It's not a bad thing. Um, and I have had quite a few members of my critique group down here graduate, let's call it, from the
Mm-hmm.
group, where for one reason or another they needed to move on or they were ready to move on. And I think that's great because one of the great rewards for me as the leader of the group is to see someone get to the point where they're ready to move on. That's always a good thing. Now, if there are other reasons why a person might leave a group or be asked to leave, unfortunately, there have been a couple cases where I have had to ask someone to leave, usually because they weren't contributing.
Mm.
But there are groups out there that have given the whole critique group environment a bad name, and there are some people who are absolutely deaf on critique groups generally because I guess they had a bad experience or maybe several bad experiences with critique groups, and as a result, they think they're not worth the time. And yes, you're right. In Finding the Right Fit, which is the first book in the series. In fact, I call it Book Zero because it's actually, in fact, I'm going to be totally shameless here, and I am going to share the cover.
Feel free.
There we go. Um, One of the things that I've put in this book is how to first requirement, I think, if you're going to join a critique group, is to figure out what it is you want to be doing as a writer. What are your goals? What do you want to write? Why do you want to write that? And that will give you a much better sense of where you want to go and what you're looking for from a critique group. That's also part of it. And so there's a questionnaire built into the book, and it's also available as a download on my website. So you can go through and answer that series of questions and kind of figure out who you are, who you want to be as a writer. And then that should help you go forward and go out to seek the kind of group that you're looking for. Now, one of the things, and I'll stop the share at this point. One of the things that I learned as I was building that particular, what turned out to be a book, was how many different places there are where you can go to get critique. We think of in-person groups, and certainly that's an option, but there are also groups that are strictly virtual. There are groups that are a mix. My group sometimes will have some of the members online and some present in person. Sometimes just schedules and such make that a requirement. But there are also sites online that are dedicated to that sort of thing. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. One is called critique.org, and another is the Critters Workshop. And so the Critters Workshop in particular is a very large operation where it's actually subdivided into multiple sub sites, if you will, where they focus on particular genres. And they even go out beyond writing as well. There's a part for video, there's one for audio, there's one for writing computer code, all sorts of things. It's become quite an enterprise. There are also groups based on social media. Not sure exactly how they work, but if you find one of them on Facebook, for example, then you can join it, look into it, see how they work, how they exchange manuscripts, and see if that's something that's a good fit for you. Of course, there are academic courses and classes. Sometimes that's more expensive than people can afford or want, or more expensive in time than people want to do. So there are those kinds of options. Bottom line is there are a lot of different ways of getting critique. And so then the question becomes, which one is likely to work best for you? And so again, in the book, there are individual chapters on each of those kinds of opportunities and options, with questionnaires for you, as far as if you found a group that you think is going to be a fit and you want to sit in and see how it works, or watch it in action, you can ask yourself these questions to say, okay, that looks like that'll work, or whoa, that's not for me at all. So, I wanted to provide that range of information, because there are a lot of folks who just don't know where to go. And so that was the intent behind this book, was to provide people with resources so that they could figure out what would be a good fit for them, both in terms of genre, in terms of cost, in terms of time commitment. Because one thing I really want to emphasize here is, if you join a critique group, and it's a good one, it's a significant time commitment on top of your commitment to your own writing. So that's something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about when they're first getting started. And then they get into the group, and even if they're just 3 or 4 members, if folks are producing a chapter a month or a chapter every few weeks, all of a sudden, if you're going to be serious about doing critique, that suddenly you're committing a lot of time, and that's something to be aware of right from the start.
100%. I couldn't agree. Well, I maybe could agree more, but I'm not going to argue. It's very important that you commit to it. So on that vein of time commitment,
Mhm.
what have you seen from that? Like, in your experience as running a critique group, or as being part
Mhm.
of one,
Yeah.
how much are we talking here? Like would it double your input time as an author, like because you just have that much to read and write and like respond
Yeah.
to, or like as you grow and get better at it, you can kind of get faster with it?
You can get faster and you can get slower at the same time,
Hmm.
because as that, you raise, without intending to, I think, a really good point, and that is learning how to do critique well, or do it at all, is a learned skill.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of folks. Even if you had English literature classes in high school or college, it's there's more to it. There's critique of works in progress is different from doing a literary analysis of something that's already published.
Hmm.
So I'll come back to that. But as far as the time commitment goes, it depends on a number of things. One is how many works you've got to do in before the next meeting, and that too depends on how the group works. Um, I personally try to read each work twice. And the first read, in theory, is supposed to be just reading it through and getting a sense of what that piece is, whether it's a chapter in a novel or whether it's a short story. poem or a series of poems, whatever. And then the second time, go through it and read it much more closely. And that's when I'm, in theory, making the comments on what I'm seeing in the work. I keep saying in theory because I found that um, more recently, in the last year or two, I spend more time doing the some of the analysis during that first reading, and then do more of it in the second reading. But then, my group um, limits ourselves to about 20 pages per submission, which
Hmm.
is usually plenty for a chapter in a novel.
Oh yeah.
Um, short story can be anywhere from a 100-word drabble to a novella length work. Poems, of course, will be much shorter, but they take more time
Oh yeah.
because you're going to read them more than once, more than twice. So that's kind of an indefinite answer to your question, because it really depends. If a piece excuse me, needs a lot of input, it can take me, because I'm very detailed, it can take me 3, 4, 5 hours. Now that's really scary. That's going to scare a lot of people off, I'm afraid. And it doesn't have to take that much time. But if you're um, trying to be serious about reading the work thoughtfully
Right.
and giving it a good analysis, it's not unreasonable to expect that you're going to spend an hour or more on that particular piece.
100%. I can attest to that personally. I've been on my blog, I've been working through Thomas More's Utopia.
Oh boy.
And yeah, oh boy is the correct response, because I've been in the preamble. Well, it's not really a preamble, but I've been in the pre-Utopia bit of the story for, gosh, I don't know, 50 pages. But
uh,
I've been able to blog for about 10 pages per blog, because what I'm finding is those 10 pages will take me close to an hour to 2 hours, because at the same time as I'm reading it, I'm writing notes and I'm jotting down ideas and I'm contemplating things on the page, and so much so I like it's gotten to the point where I've stopped recently. Like I haven't been content. I haven't been doing it so because it's just so much,
yeah.
and school started back up, so I've been busy with school and there's just so much else going on in my life. I've kind of forgotten about it, and it's a super big thing. And but that part of your brain, warning viewer, that part of your brain, once you get it going, it, at least for me, it doesn't know how to stop. So I've been rereading the Wheel of Time series for a show I'm doing with a friend of mine on YouTube, where we basically, he takes the neg, I take the positive, and we debate the Wheel of Time and like kind of sort of recount the series as we read through it together and talk about the ideas and why he likes, why he doesn't like it, why I like it, that kind of thing. It's going to be a cool show. But I'm rereading it for that show, and that critical part of my brain just doesn't shut off. Like every other paragraph minimum. Sometimes it's as bad as like every other word. I'm getting ideas like this cool thing is connecting with that idea over there, and it's constant. And just to even get through it, to read through it, I've had to stop myself from taking notes because I just wouldn't get through it. Like I'm trying to do one of these episodes per month, and even that might be ambitious because there's just so much going on in that series. But if you have good critique partners, that's what you can expect, is good material that you're yourself critiquing, but also good feedback from your partners. I would hope. Um, and one of the things that you shouldn't do if you're listening still is you shouldn't try to do it all at once. I think that's a bad idea. You know, Ross earlier said, I think he said 3 to 5 hours depending on the piece, but don't think of that as, oh, well, I have to sit down on one Saturday and spend my entire Saturday evening doing this one piece. Might that be the best way to read it initially? maybe, and but reading it initially might take you a half an hour, like for your first read through, because of how long the piece might be. But once you get into it, honestly, there's different strategies, and he probably has strategies in his books that he talks about. So don't let me step on your toes, Ross. If you have a better idea, feel free to jump in. But it might be a better idea, instead of trying to do it all in one sitting, critique a paragraph at a time. Do 2 or 3 paragraphs in a day. Don't dilly dally, but do it a paragraph at a time, so you can give that shorter section of the work more of your focus.
Well, that's I am going to disagree with you
Okay, no,
on that,
please.
because if you do that with a work in progress where you're looking to help the author improve their effort, if you focus down that narrowly, that gets more into the type of literary analysis that you would do, as Alice, you're describing with Thomas More and the other work. That's not what a critique should be doing.
Okay.
There you need to be looking at the bigger picture, and it is generally not necessarily really helpful to super micro analyze individual words or phrases. Now, it's good to point out where you might get confused as an author, or where the author has used a word incorrectly or used the wrong word. That's completely legitimate. But our approach has been to, we actually have a critique guide that we use, that lists about a dozen broad categories of areas that we want the critiquer to review. Things like story arc and structure, which for a chapter, maybe you can do something with that, maybe not. But character development, variety of other kinds of things, so that the critique can be both specific but also general, because especially with a novel, well, this is even very much true of with a short story, you've got the whole thing in front of you usually, and so you can look at the plot, you can look at the storyline, you can look at the whole thing. Do you have the inciting incident, the first turning point, the rising action, the second turning point, the climax, and the resolution? You will have that on a smaller scale, or should, in a chapter. But it becomes, if you try to do this process the way you're describing it now, it becomes, you get so far bogged down in the details that it's easy to lose track of the bigger picture, and context is important. So for me, when I'm doing that first reading, because I'm going to read the entire piece. Now, that's presuming I have a chapter or a short story. It's going to be, I'm looking for things to point out, positive or negative, based on that review sheet that we have. And these are also available for download on the Critique Doctor website. And then in the second reading is where I'm looking for more of the mechanical kinds of things. But if you get too hyper focused on a limited number of paragraphs, you lose the bigger picture of the story. And so I don't think in most cases that's particularly constructive, particularly helpful, especially on a first draft. With a first draft, one of the points that I make with the members of the group is, the real purpose of a first draft is to get the story out of your head and onto paper or into electrons. Even if you're a really dedicated plotter where you outline the whole thing, you're not going to really know what the story is until you've got that first draft completed. Maybe not even then. And if the critiquers have spent a tremendous amount of time digging into the details of that work, what can happen is when the author looks at the completed draft, they may look at the opening chapters, especially, and say, well, no, that's not where this story starts, or that's not where this book starts. And there's an important distinction there. And throw out 2 or 3 chapters. When I was writing the Eternity Plague, I started out, the early drafts had 5 chapters that each chapter introduced one of the major characters in the story. So I spent 20 pages thereabouts with not exactly backstory, but it was backstory of helping the reader get to know who this character was. When I looked at that after I was done with the thesis, I looked at that and said, no, this isn't right. I'm going to put my readers to sleep, even though it's pretty good writing, I thought. That's not where this book needs to start. And I ended up taking those 100 pages and mostly deleting them.
Wow.
It had to be done.
Yeah.
So the chapter where I introduced my reporter character went from 20-ish pages to 1 line. That's all that was necessary at that moment when I finally found where the book was going to start, as opposed to all of this other information that I had. But as my critique group was reading through those chapters, they were giving me feedback on stuff that I ended up discarding. So that's one of the risks of getting way down into the weeds on the details of how this chapter is going, because it may very well be, and especially if the author is getting conflicting feedback from other reviewers, that they may decide to change that chapter significantly, or they may decide to remove it entirely. So, you know, there's a balance to be struck here, especially with the first draft, to say, okay, here are the big picture kinds of things that need to be addressed, or things like, you know, your characters don't talk like real people.
Yeah. That's
and so that's an area where, you know, getting good detailed feedback early on is important. But getting down into, you should use this word rather than that word, that's not productive at that point in the development of the story. Later, it may be important, but early on, not so much. And let me circle back to one other thing about the where the book starts and where the story starts. You know, if you want to get really crazy about this, where does the story start? Well, it starts back at the creation of the universe.
True.
You know, if you want to take it to its logical extreme, but readers today aren't interested in things like James Michener spending the first 500 pages of Hawaii giving you the history of the Hawaiian Islands. Yeah. So it's important to identify where the inciting incident is, the incident that is going to take the protagonist and kick them out of their normal world. So you want to be able to identify that point, get just as much just enough information ahead of that to introduce the protagonist, maybe the antagonist, usually maybe not, and give a sense of what that character's normal world is, smack them with that inciting incident and get them moving. And that can be, as it was with me, you know, that was somewhere around 100 pages into the draft of the Eternity Plague. Another example story, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Had a member of the group at one point who was writing a pirate novel. Turned out to be a wonderful book. Deborah did a great job with it. But she took one of the drafts of her first chapter to a critique group, might have been mine, and they weren't impressed. They were not thrilled with that chapter. So she went home, and on the way home, she stopped at a local Safeway to do some grocery shopping and happened to run into another writer friend. and was telling her tale of woe about, oh, I worked so hard on this, and they didn't like it, and all that. And the friend said, well, can I see it? As it happened, she had the manuscript in her purse. So she pulled it out, handed it to her writer friend. Writer read the first page, said, I'm not interested in that. Read the second page, I'm not interested in that. Read the third page, that's not interesting. Read and about page 7,
Brutal.
she said that there was an incident where this warehouse on this little island in the Caribbean is attacked and the warehouse blows up. And the friend says, that's interesting. Start here.
Yeah.
And Deborah goes, but start here. In the final story, the first page and a half is introducing Dirk, the protagonist, and his friends who are going to go on this grand adventure. And the life on this island that they were living. On page 2, the warehouse is attacked, and the village that they live in is decimated.
Mm-hmm.
So, Deborah needed a page and a half to introduce the main character in his normal world. Page 2, she kicks him out of his normal world. That's where the book started. Now, the story started long before that,
Right.
but that wasn't important. It was where the books started, was at that incident.
Totally. And, that gives me a lot to think about in my own book, but it's okay. I think what I was trying to get at earlier, and thank you for all of that. Don't hear me like saying, oh, well, ignoring what Ross just said. That's not what I'm saying. It was great feedback on what I was saying. But I think my idea to sort of encourage younger authors who want to get into critiquing and all that sort of thing was not necessarily to say you have to focus on a paragraph so like ridiculously tough like I do with the Utopia or Wheel of Time, because I do come from a literary analysis background. That is what I do in university. Is I write literary analysis on finished works, dusty works for the most part. But all I was trying to say with that was, let's say your critique group meets once a month, which I think is pretty respectable if you can manage that, or even once a week. What I was just sort of trying to imply is that it might take you a grand total of 3 to 5 hours throughout that week or throughout that month to do the critiquing. But that 3 to 5 hours just doesn't have to be in one sitting. That's all I was getting at, was like, so, because that number to someone like me anyway can sound intimidating. Like, wow, I can't find 3 to 5 hours anywhere. Okay, but you can find 15 minutes. You can find a half an hour here or 10 minutes there to read a couple more pages or something. And your analysis of it, your critique of it doesn't have to be line by line, like I was maybe implying, but it should be done by the time the group comes around. So give yourself the time, figure out how long it usually takes you to critique things, and then give yourself that time to critique things. Don't rush it. Don't rush it and try to do it like the night before the critique group, because that might end up with bad critique, and you might get critiques on your critiques. So like just work on yourself and figure out your timeline there. Don't let the idea of large timelines scare you, because large timelines can be broken down into smaller ones.
And that's fair. And one of the point I want to make that does seem to contradict what I've been saying all along. As I was working on the first novel, I read a novel that I enjoyed. Wasn't in my genre at all, but I thought it was well written. I think it was an author's debut novel, traditionally published. And I thought, I want to understand how he did his character development, because that was one thing I was a bit concerned about it at the time. So I did spend several weeks, maybe even several months, going through, and this time I literally did line by line through a series of chapters, write down what happened in this paragraph. How was that character interacting with the other characters in the scene? what was the author trying to get across with that interaction, with that statement. Now that was a bit extreme, and I wouldn't say that's something that everybody needs to do, because they don't. But it was something where I had the time, and I felt I would learn from it the kinds of things that I needed to learn. Um, but again, it was focused on the craft of writing, not on the literary analysis of the piece. It was, how is this author achieving these effects in in this particular scene, or in this particular paragraph. So that's what I was looking for
Right.
in that.
But some things about that, right? You didn't have a deadline. You weren't
No,
in this author's critique group.
nope,
You didn't have anything bearing on you. It's kind of like me with Utopia, right?
right,
I'm taking my sweet time with that book because
yeah,
I'm holding to nobody except for my blog readers.
right,
Two of you out there, shout out to you guys for reading my blog. But like I'm holding to nobody really when it comes to working through an analysis of something like that myself.
mhm,
And okay, so I know you aren't necessarily on Author X, but I am on Author X, and a lot of my friends who might be watching this show are on Author X. So a couple weeks ago, there was this big kerfuffle about uh, should all authors be readers, and the answer obviously is yes. You should
mhm,
be reading if you're an author, but the question was how. I feel like, well, I personally believed, and a lot of people agreed with me, that the deeper question we're trying to ask here is how much reading should be done as an author to make yourself the best author you can be. And some people were saying, well, you have to read voraciously. You have to be reading hundreds of books a year to be a good author. And I saw a comment that I loved on someone's YouTube video about it. The comment said, "I too am a great writer. I'm just too busy reading to write it." And so there's a level of discipline you have to give yourself between reading and writing. And I think what you're doing, or what you did rather, with that character arc discovery, and what I'm doing with Moore's Utopia, is sort of what authors should be doing if we're trying to improve our craft. Some authors love reading and they just want to read for fun, and that's their hobby, as well as writing being their profession or whatever. Good on them. Like, that's awesome for them. But for someone like me, right, or reading rather, isn't really my hobby. I don't find terribly much enjoyment in it, but I respect the craft and I love the craft. So I go to these stories and I go to these groups, if I could find one maybe. And what I'm trying to get out of it is not necessarily a good time, or like early work or anything. I'm trying to glean skill from these readings. I'm trying to
mhm.
get new ideas from these readings and things that I can then take and use in my own work. So that's actually a question that I kind of have for you, if you don't mind, kind of shifting gears a little bit. Uh, well, I guess the question is two parts. You can answer both. The first question is, are you planning on doing more fiction writing soon and publishing it? And the second part to that is, if you are planning on doing more fiction soon, what have you learned from your time writing nonfiction for authors that you think will make you a better fiction writer?
Okay. Let me start by backtracking a little bit more.
Okay.
One of the points that I think is really, really important for everyone listening, watching this to take away, is that there are as many different ways of approaching reading and writing and critiquing as there are readers and writers and reviewers.
True.
So what works for one person won't be right for another person, and so it's important to figure out where um, each of these pieces fits for you. What works for you? Am I working on fiction? Yes. I am just in the very early stages of starting a new novel series. Um, and I'm also working on a what is going to be a large collection of poetry by a late friend of mine, but that's a separate task. As far as what have I learned from uh, working on these 6 books that I can pull into this next novel series, hopefully a lot. But it's going to be the sort of thing that will, I think, come out um, as the work develops. I'm going to have to do a tremendous amount of world building for this, so that's going to be something that I didn't really address in great detail in the series. Um, but it's going to be more a case of, okay, I have written about and learned these techniques for how to evaluate other people's work, so that once I get into the actual process of writing this next series, I will be applying that information as I go along. And of course, I'll be getting feedback from the group as things develop. But I don't know that I can point to any one particular thing and say, oh, I'm definitely going to do that. Because I might, in fact, definitely do that. It's not the sort of thing that I can necessarily come out and say to you now, because it will pop up at the moment that the writing is occurring. One thing I will say is that, well, 2 things. One, series are very popular, much more easy to sell than standalone books, especially, first book's got to be good, of course, to make people want to read the rest. But one of the things that I learned from writing not this nonfiction series, but the fiction series, the Eternity Plague series, was that it's really helpful to have an idea of what the entire story arc for the whole series is before you start, depending on the kind of series it is. But if it's going to be one character going through a whole series of adventures over the course of the series, it's good to know what the story arc is going to be for the series, not just the individual books, because I didn't have that for the Eternity Plague series, and that made writing a whole lot harder.
Yeah.
Getting books, figuring out what book 2 was going to be about, and then what book 3 was going to be about, that would be different enough that it would still be interesting to my readers when they got to that point. So that's kind of a lesson learned that can be applied to just about any kind of fiction writing.
Completely agreed. I that's something that I ran into once when I was working through a sci-fi series that I was trying to write.
Mm-hmm.
Was I had outlined, which, for me, like, outlining anything is huge because I'm not really an
Yeah.
outliner, but I had outlined a sort of overview of what I wanted the series to do and how I wanted it to progress. And then I was halfway through the first book, and all of a sudden my characters decide to do this other thing that takes them 2 books to get through, at least according to an outline it would have, and that completely threw everything out. So I haven't worked on that sci-fi series in a long time, but part of why I stopped working on it was it got too big and it was too much to carry. I didn't know what to do with all of it.
Yeah.
So pace yourself as a writer. I know where I'm at skill wise and ability wise, which is why I'm starting with a standalone novel.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in my craft. I believe that I have the skill to create a good, solid, well, what are the terms? Well paced, well charactered, well written standalone story that works as a grand adventure, sort of beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
But some people need the breadth of a full series to get their ideas out there, which is fine. And like, um, the biggest example that I'm thinking of is somebody like Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan, I don't know really if he started with The Wheel of Time as the pen name Robert Jordan, but he got, like, his ideas needed a 14 book long series to be well versed and to be well written and to be so impactful as they were. Because if he had tried to do that in one book, good
Yeah.
luck, pal. Like
Yeah.
you might get halfway through the second book in one book. Like it wouldn't be a good time for anybody.
And it depends very much on what the series is.
True.
Now I'm losing the name of the author, but the guy who wrote the Harry Dresden, or is writing the Harry Dresden series.
Hmm. Jim
Um,
Butcher, is that it?
Jim Butcher, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the guest presenter at a writers conference I was at last year. And now in his case, he's got something like 17 books in that series out. And he was talking about how he had another like 8 that he knew he was going to write before he was done with Harry Dresden. And but it turned out that in that case, now he hadn't plotted them out per se, but he knew what the conflict was going to be.
Hmm.
He knew what kind of antagonist opponent Harry Dresden was going to face in each of those remaining books. And so he was able to do that. When I started writing The Eternity Plague, I thought it was going to be a standalone. And then when I got to the ending, either the first ending that I later discarded and the second ending that actually got published, I'm looking at that and going, there's more to this story. Oh no, what do I do now?
Right.
So, that's the sort of thing where sometimes and going back to your comment about your characters just all of a sudden decided, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else and watch us work. Yeah, that happens and it can turn what you think is a standalone into a series, no matter how well you had plotted it, because characters happen to have minds of their own. And when that happens, it's a wonderful thing. Frustrating, maybe, but wonderful.
Right. I think the thing that allowed me to keep this book that I'm writing as standalone
Mhm.
is I had one main character. A lot of writers sometimes will blow up their cast with 5 or 6 characters, and that'd be great. But you need the real estate, the page real estate of a series sometimes to do those characters justice. If you have more than one character,
Depends on the kind of series you're writing. If
that's
you're
true.
doing a continuing character series, that's one of the names for it, where it is the same character going through from book to book to book, which is, Harry Dresden is certainly an example of that. So is my book, my series. But you can also have a continuing world series where
That's I was gonna
different
get there.
different
Yep.
characters are the protagonist, and in they may be totally different characters from the characters in a previous book, but the environment stays the same, or at least the world or the universe stays the same. A friend of mine is doing just exactly that right now with what's turning into a 4-book series. So there again, lots of different ways of skinning the cat. It's just a matter of which approach is right for this particular story.
Very true. And I've got some things in the pipeline. For example, on Amazon, when you
Mhm.
go to publish a paperback, they ask you if it's part of a series,
Right?
and I have an idea for a novella that I want to eventually write in this same world with some
Mhm.
of these same characters that follows a totally different story.
Yeah.
So I decided to create a series called Thomas's Reign, which Thomas is the main character of this book, and he becomes the king. Spoiler alert! By the end of the book, and so the series, then the continuing world series, as you called it, would be Thomas's Reign. The stories, the different adventures, the novellas. I might even write an anthology of short
Sure.
stories that happen in this world that I've created, because as for myself as a writer, I have a hard time letting things go, and so I want to keep telling more stories and telling more
Yeah.
cool ideas in familiar worlds.
Mhm.
So it is getting to that time. We're running here, but this has been awesome. I learned a lot, and
Good.
I'm going to take a lot of this information and maybe go out and try to find my own critique group or something, or maybe even start one if I'm forced to. We'll see. But I'm excited, and I hope you as a listener at home have been inspired and been maybe uh, filled with the hope that there is a place for you out in some critique group somewhere, even if it's not the one you're in right now. So definitely keep going, keep trying, keep writing. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And before we sign off, I do want to know, do you have any words of inspiration you'd like to give? Like do you have a catchphrase you tell a new author you meet, or do you have any just sort of advice?
Well, I think the big thing is put your butt in the chair, put your fingers on the keyboard, and write. Don't worry about quality in the first draft. First drafts are never, never, ever, ever final drafts. They shouldn't be anyway. They, as I said earlier, they are the place where you figure out what the story really is, no matter what you thought the story was when you started writing. And so there are going to be revisions. There are going to be second and third, and who knows how many more drafts before you get to the point where you say, okay, that's done. That's as good as I can make it. I read something recently, a quote that no novel is ever finished, it's just abandoned. You get to a point where you say, okay, this is as good as I can make it. If I continue to work on this, it's just going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
This is the place where I stop. But you can't get to that point until you've sat down and you've written that first draft. So
Right.
put your butt in the chair, start writing, and get that first draft out of you, and then get it down, then get it good.
Spot on. I tried a couple podcasts ago to say it better myself, but I didn't. And I have a short on my YouTube channel all about, your first draft isn't going to be the one you sell, so just write it anyway. And
Right.
so, I mean, even my book is on technically its fourth draft, even though the thing says draft 3. It's just because I wrote a rough draft to start.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I totally agree. Don't get married to your initial writings, because that's going to be an ugly divorce. So uh, cool.
And
All
don't
right.
be afraid to remove stuff. I mentioned earlier,
Yep.
first 100 pages of the first novel went away. The last 100 pages of the novel got completely rewritten because they needed to be.
Right.
And so that's that's part of the craft.
Absolutely. I had a section in my book where I hadn't made an outtakes document until that point, but I decided I liked it as it was sort of by itself. And so I took it out and put it in an outtake document. So I have it there in the background if I ever want to use it somewhere. But it just didn't fit in the story. It just wasn't good
Right.
there. And
Yes.
it kind of made me cringe as the author, which you never want to do if you're reading your own work back. So definitely keep working at it. Don't marry your first draft, and don't be afraid to take things out. They say kill your darlings. That doesn't just mean characters. That also means, wow, I really like this chapter, but man, it really sucks here.
Yeah.
So delete. But that's part of the craft,
It is. I did something like that when I was removing that last 100 pages. There was a series of scenes with one of my characters that I really, really liked.
Right.
Really liked. And I tried and I tried and I tried to keep it in the replacement work, and it just didn't fit. So I pulled it out and made it into a kind of a short story, and that's now my reader magnet.
There you go.
If you sign up for my newsletter, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get this short story, which introduces you to one of the characters. It's something you're not going to find in the book, but it was something that it was a way of keeping that material that I so liked. But I had to kill that darling within the novel.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So speaking of reader magnets, Ross, where can people find you? I know, like we mentioned earlier, you weren't quite as active on X. And so, do you have a website you're active on? Do you have a blog? Where can people find you and support your work?
Yeah, I have 2 websites. For my fiction work, it's rossblampert.com. In fact, let me go ahead and put that in the chat.
Okay.
I'm not terribly active on social media. I do have a Facebook page for the Critique Doctor. But like I said, I don't use it very much.
Totally.
I'm just not good at social media. So the websites are the best places to find me. And of course, all of the books are on Amazon. I'm going to be totally shameless again and
Please do.
throw up briefly the covers for the other books so folks know what they look like. So that's book one in the actual series.
Mm-hmm.
That's book two. And you can see I had an artist do caricatures
Right.
of me as the critique doctor. That was kind of fun. Book three is theme, plot, and structure. And let's see, book four is characters and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last one. For a topic that is frightening for a lot of folks, and that's how do I critique poetry? I don't know how.
Yeah. Definitely, if you're listening at home, go check out his books. They're well worth the read, I promise. And if this hour-long conversation hasn't convinced you of that, I'm not sure what to tell you, to be honest. But we are out of time for tonight, so I wanted to thank you again, Ross, for being on the show. It was a
Pleasure.
great pleasure to have you on. You are a gracious guest, and I want to just remind everyone, as you go about your week this week on your writing adventure, keep the beacon lit.